People keep asking me what I said when I walked into that kitchen. They want to know if I flipped the table, if I lost my mind, if I came apart at the seams. The answer is no. I didn't say much at all. But by the time the sun came up the next morning, what I had done to my son, most people would call it severe. I call it overdue. My name is Martin Calloway. I am 61 years old. I have been married to Carol for 28 years, and up until 12 days ago, I would have told you my family was solid. Not perfect. Nobody's family is perfect, but solid. The kind of solid you build over decades of showing up when it isn't convenient, paying for things nobody says thank you for, and loving people who sometimes make it very difficult to love them back. My son Dominic is 30 years old. Broad shoulders, firm handshake, a career in commercial real estate that he will tell you he built himself, though if you pressed me on it, and I am pressing myself now, a healthy portion of what he calls his network was introduced to him by me, personally. Over the course of years, we'll get to that. Dominic married into the Porter family about 2 years ago. His wife Tanya is fine enough, pleasant girl. But her father, Gerald Porter, the first time I shook Gerald's hand, something in my gut said, "Watch this one." I shook it anyway. I smiled anyway. Because that's what you do when your son is in love. That was my first mistake. 11 days ago, I flew to Seattle for a series of client meetings. Nothing unusual. I travel 4, maybe 5 times a year for work. Carol knew I was going. The whole family knew. What nobody knew, including Carol, was that my last meeting was canceled on day 9. I could have stayed, ordered room service, watched something forgettable on cable. Instead, I booked the first flight home. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. 28 years of marriage, and I still liked surprising my wife. Sue me. I landed, grabbed my bag, drove myself home. It was a little past 3 in the afternoon on a Monday, and when I turned onto my street, I saw it immediately. Gerald's car. That black Cadillac he loves like it defines him, parked right in my driveway like he'd paid the mortgage. I felt that thing in my gut again, told myself I was tired, reading into things. People visit. That's normal. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked to the front door. The house was loud. Not loud in a party way, loud in a layered way, like 2 different worlds were happening under the same roof at the same time. From the back of the house, from the direction of the kitchen, I could hear laughter. Loud, comfortable, settled laughter, dishes moving, conversation, people who had nowhere else to be and not a single care. And from the living room, silence, the wrong kind. I pushed the door open, and I saw her. Carol was on the floor, not sitting, not resting. On the floor, her back against the base of the couch, legs out in front of her, right hand pressed beneath her nose. Her white blouse had a dark stain spreading across the collar that I recognized before my brain caught up with what I was seeing. Blood. Her eyes found mine the second I walked in. And I want to tell you something. I have seen Carol cry at commercials. I have seen her cry at other people's weddings, at songs on the radio that remind her of her mother. I have never, in 28 years, seen her look the way she looked at me in that moment, like she had been holding on. Like the moment she saw my face, something in her finally said, "Okay, he's here. You can let go now." That is the image that sealed everything that followed. I did not panic. I am not a man who panics. I dropped my bag, crossed the room, got down on one knee, and called 911 right there. No hesitation, while the dispatcher walked me through keeping her calm and upright, while I was checking her pulse and wiping blood from her face with my bare hand. I could still hear them from the kitchen, laughing. My 30-year-old son and Gerald and Linda Porter laughing, like they were at a dinner party, like nothing in the world was wrong, like my wife wasn't 11 feet away from them bleeding on the living room floor. Sit with that. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. They came in fast and professional. The lead paramedic, young man, couldn't have been more than 30. Name tag read Simmons, looked up from the blood pressure cuff with an expression that told me everything before he spoke. "Mr. Calloway," he said quietly, "your wife is in hypertensive crisis. Her pressure is critically high. This didn't just happen. This has been building. She needed attention before this point." He said it clinically, without accusation. And I looked toward the kitchen, where the laughter had finally gone quiet. I held Carol's hand until they lifted her onto the stretcher. She squeezed my fingers. I squeezed back. Twice. Our thing. 28 years of our thing. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the kitchen. I have walked into a lot of rooms in my life. Boardrooms, hospitals, courtrooms. But nothing has ever felt like walking into that kitchen on that afternoon. The three of them were just sitting there. Dominic at the head of the table. Gerald to his left, Linda to his right. Plates of food in front of them. Glasses of sweet tea. In my house, while my wife bled on my floor. I stood in the doorway. I've learned over 61 years that the most powerful thing a man can do when he is furious is slow down. Every instinct says, speed up, raise your voice, make them feel the weight of what they did. But slow is scarier. Slow means you've already decided what happens next, and nothing they say will change it. I stood there, slow and quiet, and I looked at my son. Dominic stood up. I'll give him that. He stood the moment he saw my face, which tells me somewhere in that 30-year-old brain he already knew. You don't stand up like that unless you know. Dad, he started. I held up one finger. He stopped. I turned to Gerald first. He had his hands folded on my dining table like he was chairing a meeting, like he belonged there. Get out of my house, I said, voice completely calm. Gerald blinked. Linda set down her tea. Dominic opened his mouth. Dad, just let me... I'm not talking to you yet. Still calm, still slow. Both of you, out of my house. Now. Gerald tried the reasonable adult approach. Leaned forward, said, Martin, I think if we all just take a breath. Gerald. He stopped. I didn't ask for a breath. I didn't ask for a conversation. I asked you to leave my house, and I'm saying it one final time. Linda touched Gerald's arm. They got up. As they passed through the living room, they saw Carol on the stretcher now, oxygen mask over her face, IV in her arm. Simmons and his partner, working around her. Professionally. Urgently. Linda's hand went over her mouth. Gerald went completely still. Good. I needed them to see that. I needed that image burned behind their eyelids for a long time. They left without another word. The front door clicked shut. The house went very quiet. Just me and Dominic. He was still standing at the kitchen table, hands at his sides, jaw tight. He has his mother's eyes, and right now those eyes couldn't decide between defensive and ashamed. I walked back into the kitchen and sat down directly across from him. Sit down, Dominic. He sat. Talk, I said. All of it. He exhaled, ran a hand over his face, and then he told me. And what came out of his mouth in the next 4 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about that afternoon. Gerald and Linda hadn't just stopped by. They'd been planning this for 3 weeks. They came specifically while I was out of town. They brought paperwork, actual paperwork related to a commercial property I've owned for 17 years, one I'd always told Dominic would be his one day. Gerald had decided that one day meant right now, and that with the right pressure on Dominic, they could get him to begin signing over controlling interest while I was in Seattle, without my knowledge, without my signature. Think about that. And your mother, I said. Where does she come in? Dominic looked at the table. She overheard. She came in about 40 minutes after they arrived. She heard what Gerald was saying, and she wasn't having it, Dad. You know how she is. I know. 28 years I've known exactly how she is. She told Gerald the property wasn't mine to sign away, that he was out of line coming here like this. Gerald tried to talk over her. She got loud. He got loud. It went back and forth. And then she just stopped. He paused. She said her head was pounding, said she felt dizzy. She went to the living room and I thought I'd check on her, but Gerald started up again and he couldn't finish. He didn't need to. I sat with everything he'd said. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear Simmons talking in the next room. I could hear the stretcher wheels on my hardwood floor. Let me make sure I understand, I said, and Dominic straightened in his chair because my voice had changed. Your mother told your father-in-law, in her own home, that he was out of line. He talked over her. It escalated. She told you she didn't feel well, and you went back to the kitchen. Dominic said nothing. You went back to the kitchen, I said again. Not a question, just the fact of it between us on the table. Dad, I didn't know it was serious. She has high blood pressure. She has had it for 7 years. You have known that for 7 years. The paramedic, a stranger who has never met your mother, understood the urgency immediately. And you. I stopped myself. Because I felt it. That thing you feel when you've raised someone, loved someone, sacrificed for someone, and you realize in one terrible moment that somewhere along the way something didn't take. I stood up. I don't know who you've been spending your time becoming, I said, but he is not the man I raised. I walked out of the kitchen, back to my wife's side. I took her hand, and I did not speak to Dominic again for the rest of that night. The silence wasn't weakness. The silence was me thinking. And when Martin Calloway gets very, very still, that's when you should be worried. There's a kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 in the morning. Not peaceful quiet. The kind that presses down on your chest and makes the refrigerator hum. The clock on the wall, the sound of a car passing outside feel louder than they should. That was the quiet I sat in. Carol was asleep in our bedroom. Finally. It had taken the medication, the lowered lights, 40 minutes of me sitting on the edge of the bed holding her hand before her breathing evened out and her face relaxed. I watched her sleep for a long time. I thought about 28 years. About the woman who married me when I had more ambition than money, who worked beside me when we were building everything from scratch, who raised our son with more grace than he deserved. I thought about her on that floor. And then I stopped thinking and started moving. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and went to work. I am not an impulsive man. I don't make decisions in heat, and I don't do things I'll have to undo later. Every single thing I did that night, I had already decided in that kitchen, when Dominic was still talking, and my face was completely still. By the time I sat down at that desk, I wasn't angry anymore. I was decided, and there is a profound difference between the two. The first call was to the bank. Yes, at 2 in the morning. Because when you've had the accounts long enough and you're the primary holder, there's a number on the back of the card that doesn't sleep. I've used it once in 28 years. This was the second time. Dominic had been an authorized user on my primary card for 5 years. Gas, groceries, dinners, weekend trips he called. Networking, that I'm fairly sure involved neither networks nor spreadsheets. Removed. The woman on the phone was professional and efficient. Took less than 4 minutes. Car insurance. Off my policy before 3 a.m. The apartment. This one took a little more. I'd co-signed Dominic's lease 2 years ago. Nice building, good neighborhood, the kind that requires a co-signer with a specific credit score and income. Mine. I called the landlord at 7 a.m. When the office opened, man named Ron. Good enough guy. I told him I needed my name removed at the earliest legally possible opportunity and that I'd cooperate with whatever process was required. Ron paused. Everything okay, Martin? Everything is being handled, Ron, I said. Thank you for asking. Every first of the month, quietly and without announcement, I'd been transferring money into Dominic's personal account. Started when he was getting on his feet after college. Became habit. Became something neither of us discussed because we both just accepted it as part of how things worked. I logged in at 3:15 and canceled the recurring transfer. Permanently. Not paused. Canceled. I sat back after that one, because that transfer represented something beyond money. It represented a version of my son I had been quietly funding. A comfort level, a cushion, a safety net that had maybe, just maybe, allowed him to make the kinds of choices a man makes when he knows somebody will always catch him. Not anymore. Then came the calls I'm not going to apologize for. Over the years, I'd opened doors for Dominic, made introductions, called in favors. There's a currency that takes decades to build, and it lives entirely in other people's trust. I'd spent some of mine on my son. Gladly, proudly. I spent the early hours of that morning taking it back. I called men I've known 20, 25 years. I told them simply that Dominic would no longer be operating with my backing, my endorsement, or my name. That any courtesies extended on my behalf should be considered concluded. Every one of them respected the call, without pressing for details. That's what 61 years of integrity gets you. By 5 a.m., the streaming accounts were gone. The shared subscriptions canceled. I had a locksmith booked for 7:30. I made coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the sky go from black to gray to that pale Chicago blue that means morning has decided to show up whether you're ready for it or not. I thought about Gerald Porter sitting in his house right now. Probably not sleeping either, wondering what comes next. He should wonder. Because the property he came to my house to manipulate my son into signing, I'd already left a voicemail for my attorney at 6 a.m. I need to restructure the documentation on the Franklin Avenue property. Ironclad, airtight. Done this week. Gerald Porter would never, in this lifetime, get within legal reach of anything I built. Dominic showed up at the house at 9. I watched from the upstairs window, saw him walk up with his shoulders set the way he sets them before a hard conversation, watched him reach into his pocket for his key, watched him try it again, stand there, perfectly still, beginning to understand. He knocked. I didn't answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He borrowed a phone from the neighbor, the Hendersons, and I saw Barbara Henderson hand it over with the concerned expression of a woman who doesn't know what's happening but can feel that it's serious. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Barbara's number. I picked up. A brief silence. Then Dominic's voice. The defensiveness was gone. What was left underneath was something raw, something younger, something that reminded me painfully of the boy he used to be. "You let your mother lay on that floor," I said. "You knew her condition. You knew what stress does to her body. And when she needed you, her son, you chose to go back to that table." He didn't speak. I could hear him breathing. "I love you," I said. "I will always love you. But love is not the same as access. And right now, every door I've kept open for you is closed." "For how long?" he asked quietly. "Until you've become the kind of man who doesn't need me to answer that question for him." I hung up, walked back to the bedroom. Carol was awake, sitting up, morning light across her face, tired but present. My wife again. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I sat beside her, took both her hands, looked at her the way you look at someone when you almost lost them and need a moment to be grateful you didn't. "Everything," I said, "is handled." She searched my eyes. Then she leaned her head on my shoulder. "Some people will say I was too hard on my son. Maybe. But I watched a paramedic, a complete stranger, treat my wife's crisis with more urgency than the man I raised. And I decided that night that the greatest act of love I had left for Dominic wasn't to keep the doors open. It was to finally let him feel what it costs when they close. He'll either grow from it or he won't. But Carol is alive. She is safe. She is home. And that is the only thing that matters.